Hello, welcome to Arcadian. About a week ago, Wizards of the Coast released a video talking about how they were conducting the surveys on One D&D, the next edition of Dungeons & Dragons, which is supposed to become the definitive edition of the game. Jeremy Crawford was almost bragging about how they got so many responses and they were being so responsible taking the public opinion into consideration. And after hearing how the survey is being conducted, I'm now in the condition to say, professionally, that whatever faith I had in One D&D is now severely damaged. Let me begin this video with a short introduction regarding my professional career, because I don't think I ever mentioned that in this channel. Though I graduated university as a doctor of veterinary medicine, I ended up becoming a data scientist, and that has been my area of work for the past 5 years. Working with data and drawing inferences that are statistically significant from it is my daily life, and the One D&D survey made me want to curl in a little ball and cry. Let's start with the elephant in the room: bias. The statistical base for all surveys is that you must assure that your sample is representative of the whole population under study, which means that if the One D&D survey is to be trusted, Wizards of the Coast must assure that the sample of people who responded to it is representative of the whole D&D community. To show you an actual example of how wrong a survey can go if the sample is not representative, in 1936, Literary Digest conducted a survey to find out who would win the presidential election. The study gathered 2.4 million responses and predicted that Alf Landon would win with 57% of the votes. When the election came, Franklin Roosevelt beat Alf Landon with 62% to 37%. Why did this happen? The first reason was that the sample was not representative. While Literary Digest sent out ballots randomly, they chose their sample from phone numbers, driver registrations, and country club memberships. Let us not forget that 1936 was the peak of the Depression. Only the rich could afford phones, cars, or country clubs at the time. By biasing their sample so foolishly, they only surveyed the rich, and their results were completely off. Do you see how this could affect One D&D survey too? Actually testing the rules that are being published monthly by Wizards is a very hard work, so only a small portion of D&D players is likely to actually test them. The more hardcore players who have the time and the game groups to try them on a regular basis. The survey answers will come mostly from those players, so they will shape the future of D&D more than any other group. But those are only a small portion of the D&D community, and it's very likely that their tastes differ from the rest of the people. They might value more intricate and complex rules that favor min-maxing or combat, while other groups of players, such as casual or even new players, would prefer simpler rules that favor role-playing or learning the game. A D&D game shaped by any non-representative group will always produce questionable results, because it will always give an unfair advantage to one particular group without knowing how much it actually represents the whole community. But it doesn't end here. One other mistake that Literary Digest committed was sending out 10 million ballots from which they only received 2.4 million answers. Now, this may seem like a lot, but what it actually means is that 75% of everyone inquired didn't answer. Why? The fact is that people who respond to surveys are different from people who don't, and the reasons for someone not to respond to a survey can vary a great deal. This can be impacted by their attitude towards the survey, by whether they like the object of study or not. For example, if you receive a package at home, you are much more likely to give a bad review and place a complaint if it came damaged or it doesn't work, than you are to waste your time writing a good review if it works as expected. However, people who don't respond to surveys can differ from the ones who do in more subtle and significant ways, for example, due to personality. This is what is called the non-response bias. By leaving the choice to answer the One D&D survey to the public, only those who really want to give their opinion will actually answer. This might be a good and democratic idea on paper, but in reality, it doesn't work. What about the shy people? What about those who don't want to be bothered, but love the game nonetheless? What about those who didn't hear about the survey at all? What this ensures is that the sample will be biased, because only those who usually shout the loudest will actually answer the survey, which is the same to say that One D&D will be shaped by the answers of the people who are constantly arguing about rules and shouting about who is right on Reddit. Now, it's obvious that I'm exaggerating for dramatic purposes, but let me be clear about something. Those people should definitely have a voice too. They are players as well, but the way that the survey is being conducted is effectively cutting out a whole portion of the D&D community which still plays D&D and still has relevant opinions. Leaving their survey open for anyone in the public to answer is just shaking off the responsibility off their shoulders. Wizards should be employing specialized marketing analyst companies to study how the entire community, and not just one subset, likes to play the game. Maybe even going to such lengths as promoting events in hobby stores to try out the new rules and have some more representative feedback. And yes, I know this is how things were always done with Unearthed Arcana. That doesn't make it any more correct. And it's even worse when this is going to shape the whole future of the game. But there is more. The way the rules are being tested in batches is also bad for drawing solid statistical inference. By giving us different iterations of the same rules on sequential Unearthed Arcana editions, they are effectively enforcing a univariate analysis, and no scientist worthy of that name will base their study on univariate tests for anything aside from exploratory analysis. For example, consider this graph displaying the number of deaths by drowning in pools over the years and the number of movies Nicolas Cage appeared in by year as well. If we performed a univariate analysis over this data, it would tell us that when Nick Cage appears more in movies, that kills more people by drowning. We know that is not true because the two things are completely unrelated, but what if they weren't? How could you distinguish associations by chance from those which are cause and consequence? Some of these new rules are relatively harmless to test on a univariate basis. For example, it's easy to understand how natural 20s always succeeding and natural 1s always fumbling will play out in the game just by testing that rule alone. But what about testing the new classes? If we test the new Bard versus the old Bard side by side, we can draw our own conclusions about whether we like it or not. But the balance of a class is measured in how well it plays out with the remaining classes. How can we judge if the new classes will be balanced with each other when we only saw 3 of them? But even if we ignore everything that we have been discussing so far, even if we assume that everything else was done very well statistically speaking, and there were no biases at all, there is one last pet peeve that I have with the way they are measuring player satisfaction. As Jeremy Crawford said, they assume that we approve a new rule when it measures 70% or higher in the acceptance levels. However, if a certain rule has an acceptance between 60 and 70, it is still considered salvageable. They just assume that we didn't love it, but we think it shows promise, so it just needs a little bit of reworking. Well, I gotta say, it is better using 60% than 50% as an approval standard, which would be many people's first instinct. However, I don't like that number. If a certain rule has gathered 60% in approval rate, it means that 40% of the community doesn't like it. And due to all of the biases that we discussed so far, it is also perfectly possible that the disapproval rate is even higher because people who dislike it might not even bother to waste their time giving feedback. Jeremy himself said that it is extremely rare for something to rank low on satisfaction, and that from all the rules tested in the first batch, nothing ranked below the 60s, which is considered the still salvageable range. Even though we know that one of those rules was the natural 20s always critting and natural 1s always fumbling, which we know was very controversial online. If something that generally disliked is still considered salvageable, what wouldn't be? The consequence of a scoring system like this is that everything, even those things which are very controversial and generally disliked, will still be considered salvageable at least. They will be able to issue a bad rule that people will dislike, but they will still consider salvageable, so a few Unearthed Arcanas later, they can release a new version of that rule with some tweaking, and it will probably be more generally accepted by the public, so they will be able to constantly perfect ideas, even the ones that many people didn't like and should have been cut out in the beginning. Which raises the question. If they're asking the public what they like and don't like, but everything will still probably linger in the salvageable range, what will ever get cut out? Maybe I'm overcomplicating things. Maybe I'm brewing a storm in a glass of water, which is an expression that I used before that exists in Portuguese, but apparently doesn't in English, as many people pointed out. But we are not talking about an indie game company. This is Wizards of the Coast, the owners and publishers of the biggest role-playing game on Earth. It is not wrong of us to expect a certain standard of quality. We will have to wait and see how this turns out, but I must admit that I lost much of my faith in One D&D. I can only hope that the creative minds behind the new rules and the game design gives us great stuff from the get-go because, as we've seen, it sure isn't going to be cut out in the testing even if it's bad. If any of you watching this video work in marketing analysis, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. My professional experience is very scientific. I wonder if you agree with me or not. If you like this video and you think that what I say is not complete garbage, consider helping me out by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and most of all, sharing this video with your friends to help it reach a wider audience. Especially that friend of yours who thinks that One D&D is going to be great and everything about it is wonderful. Don't forget that there are two main playlists for you to watch on this channel. The first one teaches you how to play Dungeons & Dragons from zero, and the second one has my own personal DM advice for you to improve your DMing and also your storytelling abilities. You can also find links for my social media down below in the Underdark, where I usually post my art. Yes, I'm a veterinarian, a data scientist, but also a comic book author and a writer. Thank you for watching. I'm the first Arcadian, and I hope to see you in the next video.